Now it's time for Perspective on the programme, and it is a week since the US President Joe Biden visited Angola, the first ever visit by an American president to the country and one of Biden's last visits abroad as president. The visit was really highlighting then the importance of the nation and of the African continent as a whole. Angola has come a long way since the 80s, when it came partly under the control of the rebel group UNITA amid one of Africa's longest and bloodiest civil wars. That an image to some extent repeated in Sudan in the 90s, as rebels there of the SPLM also fought a bloody war. The author of a new book, Insurgent Nations, Rebel Rule in Angola and South Sudan, has just been published, and its author, Paula Cristina Roque, joins us on the programme now. Thanks very much for joining us. Thanks very much for being with us. Angola back in the spotlight then. A surprising move from Biden, do you think, to make Angola such a top priority?
Well, it goes with what the Americans have always done. They don't have permanent friends, they have permanent interests. And on this side, they're on the competing side of where they were during the Cold War. And so for them now, it's strategic on the sense that they are edging out China and Russia's influence in Angola in military and in economic terms. And for the US, it's about critical minerals and accessing them for the green transformation energy, but also using Angola as a conduit for regional stability. So the Americans have a very checkered history in Angola. They are seen locally as having betrayed all sides. But also, and in the image you're seeing there, that meeting on the Lobito corridor was held in a regime-connected company headquarters. So in one way or another, the Democratic administration is being complicit in nepotism and regime corruption. And so this is something that is very difficult for the Angolans to stomach yet again.
I know that your story, your personal story, is very intricately linked to the history of Angola. You spent a lot of time as well researching the situation in South Sudan. Tell us from your own personal story, though, how they are intrinsically linked, if you like.
Well, both South Sudan and Angola in many ways were countries that were filled with hope and optimism. There's so much to be built and so much potential there. But this was also a place where idealism went to die, in the sense that you had two rebel movements, the SPLM in Sudan and then UNITA in Angola, that were incredibly resilient. They were some of the most emblematic insurgencies on the continent, and they fought Africa's longest civil wars. And they did so because it wasn't just about the military. It was about securing legitimacy with the population and building a parallel state. So in many ways, you had two states during at least 12 years in both countries, where there was a contesting sense of society, what it meant to be Angolan, what it meant to be Sudanese, where services were provided, where education was mandatory in the sense of UNITA, where they had an image and an idea of what a future state would be. And they were reformist wars because those two countries were already independent. So they had already ousted the colonial powers, and they were fighting against what they perceived were neo-imperialist projects, where those that took over from the colonial powers failed the people, and they failed to bring reform, they failed to bring democracy, they failed to bring development. It doesn't mean that UNITA and the SPLM could have done that. And in fact, the SPLM that then later took on the government of South Sudan when it became independent in 2011, had only 2 years before it imploded in a genocidal war.
So what are the similarities, if you like, if I could just interrupt you, what are the similarities, would you say, between the conception and the vision of both of the rebel movements there?
So they were both incredible. Well, they were very different in many ways, but they held a sense of possibility and a sense of, we know what is going wrong in our countries, and we have a solution. And so they were both led by two very charismatic leaders, John Garang in one sense and Jonas Savimbi in another in Angola. And these leaders believed that they truly represented they were the presidents of their people. And if they were to reach the presidency of their countries, which neither did, they would lead their countries towards a very different political order. And so in that sense, they had a tremendous, and there is John Garang, exactly, who was killed only 3 weeks when he took the vice presidency in what was a mediated solution to the war in Sudan. And so there are many differences, there are many similarities. They, like I said, were two of the most resilient insurgencies in Africa, and they forced their governments that were better armed, that were better supported by proxy during the Cold War, and brought them to their knees, brought them to negotiate peace agreements. And so they fought for almost 30 years. And this is unheard of, that these insurgencies could keep going for so long under so many difficult critical junctures where they were almost defeated on many fronts. They
just
lost
got time to ask you about, I mean, it's 10 years now, isn't it, since South Sudan got its independence. That was in 2011. Angola saw the end of the civil war, 2002, both relatively recent. But of course, what you're talking about before, still having an impact, still having ramifications today.
Absolutely. Today, both countries are, in one way or another, failed states. The people that these movements wanted to liberate don't see legitimacy in the governments that represent them. These countries are pillared, the regimes are pillared on securitization and not on services, not on development. There is widespread hunger in both countries, and we're talking about countries that are oil producers. So in many ways, the liberations and the reforms that these two insurgencies offered and fought for never materialized. And so there is still much to be done. Most of the leaders that fought in these insurgencies are still alive. In one way or another, they're contributing to the problem. Others are trying to resolve it. But sooner or later, there will come a point where they will have to look back on their history, assess it, and say, we need to do it differently this time.
Great to talk to you on the programme. Thank you very much for joining us, Paula Cristina Roque. The book is called Insurgent Nations, Rebel Rule in Angola and South Sudan. Thanks for joining us on the programme today.